Welcome to Mind Shifters Radio. Today is Tuesday, the 13th of May. Mother's Day coming up soon. Mother's Day, yes. Okay, I missed it. No, I didn't. Anyway, welcome. Glad you're here. And glad we get to have this conversation as we move forward. I really appreciated the questions that we got yesterday, especially around the commitment and around the development of the work. And I thought I'd we've got more material to cover from the codependence to interdependence workshop, so we'll continue the series. But I wanted to offer a couple of examples of this whole idea of literally destroying ourselves with blame. Those who become devoted card-carrying members of the one world universal religion of blame put an error between themselves and the truth of who we are as human beings. Our objective here is to provide the tools for undoing this error. So one of the first ones that I'd like to cover, and this is kind of done, tongue in cheek, but actually it's a valid little story that we were all taught. We were all taught. Did you realize that you were taught in childhood about codependence? In fact, the first rendition of this teaching on codependence goes back to, as far as I can tell, about 1797. And the original of it went like this. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. 60 men and 60 more cannot place Humpty Dumpty as he was before. Remember yesterday we talked about David Bohm's idea of unbroken wholeness. So we want to take a look at that from several perspectives, because in order for the mind to support us in bringing forward the truth of who we are as human beings, the brain cells have to be there for it. And they have to be there reinforced, strong enough and broad enough to overcome the error. I did some historical research on Humpty Dumpty, and so I thought I'd share a little bit of the history with you. So that version I shared with you was 1797. Then in 1842 it appears again, slightly different version, and it goes like this. Humpty Dumpty lay in a beck. Now, a beck is a small stream or a brook, with all his sinews around his neck. 40 doctors and 40 rights couldn't put Humpty Dumpty to rights. Recognizing you have to give up trying to solve this problem from brokenness. So here we've got two pieces talking about 60, that's 60, 120 men in one case, and 40 doctors and 40 rights, and a right, I believe, is a machinist. And then in 1882, it came back again, more in the version that we're aware of today. Humpty Dumpty sat on a wall. Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men. Of course, what is the king? The king is the vision of superiority, of perfection, of divine appointment. But all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty together again. Now, recognizing that somebody had the wisdom to try to get a message to us, and it was given to us very early in childhood. So if we were to interpret that story, I'd like to offer this interpretation. Being Humpty Dumpty sat atop a creation, and Great Wall. What is the Great Wall? The Great Wall is the fact that you and I are, at least in terms of our awareness here on the earth, are at the pinnacle of creation, i.e., we have one capability, one faculty that no other creature on the earth, as far as we know, has. And that is that we can originate something new. There isn't one creature in the creation. The creature can respond with its faculties to a danger. You know, the wolf has her den of cubs on the side of a river, and the wolf gets the intuitive message there's a big storm coming and her den's going to be flooded out. And what does she do? She's guided, she's directed, and she takes her cubs to higher ground. Now, people would say, well, then she's originating. I'd offer no, there's no origination there. If there was origination there, she would, yes, take her cubs to higher ground and she'd build herself a house that would be waterproof. But we're the only ones who've done that sort of thing. We're the only ones who have that capability. So sitting on top of this wall, I would offer is speaking of our original being, and that we are in a world, a great wall that reflects our slightest whims. And even if our slightest whim, you remember the man Yeshua said, resist not evil. Why did he say that? He said, because you are an originator, you are a creator, and if you engage in the mind energy of what the world calls evil, and remember in Aramaic, that's just an archery term that means when you fired at the target, you missed the target altogether. That's all the word evil means. So this great wall, this creation, says to us, tell me what you want, and I will give it to you. However, what happened? We fell. Sat on the great wall and fell. What was the fall? The fall, I would offer, was into denial. Creating from the state of denial, we have the power to summon experiences that reflect the part of our own minds that we've dissociated from. So remember, in this cycle of codependence, the first step is denial. And again, in this work, we have a specific definition of denial. The word denial speaks of the time when I either think or speak as though something outside of me is the cause of what's moving inside of me. So I summon something in my creation. It shows up and I go, I don't want this. No, 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 no. Well, stop and think. If it's shown up 87 different times with 42 different people in your life, sooner or later you got to go, I'm the common denominator. I'm the one that drew it here. But when we summon an experience from an unconscious level, that part we've dissociated from, then we blame somebody or something else. So once Humpty Dumpty, once the being that we are falls into blame, forgetting and blocking the fact that we are the source of the very creation that's delivering the experience of our broken essence to us, once we recognize that, we have a chance to wake up from it. So Humpty Dumpty's great fall was that since perception of the inner problem was now projected, what happens when I deny? What happens when I say, you made me angry? Well, obviously, if there's anger moving in me, I have anger. But when I say to someone else, you made me angry, I'm in essence saying to my mind, you're not allowed to show me the source of my anger. Now, show me a whole picture about how somebody else is doing it to me. So the very brain cells that I've put into the unconscious, that I've created this unnatural condition with, this unconscious state, are now hidden from me. And the very thing that's hidden from me is what someone responds to. And when they respond, they resonate what I've hidden from myself. And since my attention is on that out there, my attention's outside of myself, those brain cells I've dissociated from are used Because yes, you came along and responded and resonated with them, but then I used those brain cells to build my brain's image of you. Now I'm into projection. So I've created this false world where projected images tell me that the problem is somewhere outside of me. I'm feeling it, but it's caused from somebody or something out there. So what does Humpty Dumpty do? Well, two different versions. He's got three score plus three score men. He's got doctors and Wainwrights. He's got the king's horses, the king's men. He went to where he believed the real power was, and by doing so, he gave away his own human life. I guess I should say that more correctly. We give away our own human lives. So being internally broken means that everything out there, there's nothing out there that's going to fix it for you. Now, if someone has made the journey, they can hand you the tools and support you in using them, but ultimately, each individual is going to have to do this piece of work on their own. Yes, they can be supported in it. Yes, if you got the tools, it makes it easier. So all these experts, the king's horses, the king's men, could not fix his brokenness with all their external remedies. Humpty Dumpty, being, that's just a symbol for being, had to own and bring his own wholeness back into the brokenness that he was in experience of. And to do that, the brokenness had to be owned. It couldn't be projected. Elsewise, one was stuck in a cycle of perception, showing us that the internal problem is outside of us, and therefore people take external actions. They try to fix them. They try to change them. Whatever. An external action will never change an internal problem. Each one of us has to own our own fall, our own brokenness. Now, there's an ancient mythical children's rhyme explaining it. Let's listen to a man named Max Planck. Max Planck is the father of quantum physics. And the reason I'm bringing these other folks into it is because as you broaden the brain cells that you build into your mind, instead of controlling you, having been given truth, now can become the support for replacing being, for healing the brokenness and being returned to where we belonged in the first place. So is the solution in the world of matter? Well, here's what Max Planck said. In all my research, I've never come across matter. To me, the term matter, notice here's a physicist, one of the preeminent physicists in history, and he's talking the same thing as Yeshua's talking. To me, the term matter implies a bundle of energy which is given form by an intelligent spirit. You are Humpty Dumpty, sitting on a great wall, and you have the ability to bring together the world of form. Remember, Einstein says, on such things as matter, we've been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy. Energy whose vibrations have been so low as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. We don't live in the material world. There are no problems in the material world. There is no solution in the material world. There's only the expression of our creative process. So once again, Max Planck is saying the term matter implies a bundle of energy which is given form by an intelligent spirit. As a man who's devoted his entire life, he goes on to say, to the most clear-headed science, the study of matter, I can tell you, as a result of my research about atoms, this much. There is no matter as such. All matter originates, and we could insert here, originates by those who sit on the Great Wall, or by those who have fallen. In one case, it is a conscious origination. In another case, it's just an unconscious replication of what's stored in the system from one's own past or from the generations. So again, he says all matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force, which brings the particle of an atom to vibration and holds this most minute solar system of the atom together. So what's he saying? What does it? It's done with our minds. Now, there's a real mind and there's a fake mind. Remember the ego world. The ego has a cheap copy of everything that's real in the spiritual dimension. We're looking to make conscious contact with and awaken in the dimension where actuality exists, not in the dimension of effect where personality exists. Remember the word persona? Persona is a Greek word, mask. Now let's listen to another physicist. I mentioned him a little bit yesterday, and we'll go in a little deeper to what he had to say. David Joseph Bohm, who worked closely with Einstein, and he's widely considered to be one of the preeminent quantum physicists of all time. He's right up there with Max Planck. He was a giant in the field of theoretical physics, philosophy, and interestingly enough, neuropsychology. This is a man who made important contributions mathematically to the Manhattan Project. And in collaboration with the Stanford neuroscientist Carl Pribram, he was involved in the early development of the holonomic model of the brain, the theory that the brain operates in a manner similar to a hologram, in accordance with the quantum mathematical principles and characteristics of wave patterns. So now we're back to these energetic patterns. What shows up in our lives, whether we're sitting on top of the wall or we've fallen off? Our ability to originate or replicate and bring about experiences. So David Bohm offers this. Thought has developed in a way that it claims not to be affecting anything. That is, he's saying, we're told to ignore the power of thought, pretty much. He says it's just telling us the way things are. Therefore, people cannot see that they are creating a problem and trying to solve it with the mind that created it. Remember Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the mind that created it. What has to happen in order for healing to occur? You can't keep cycling in that mind. You got to be out of your mind. And there's where there's only one place on the planet that I've found a tool with which you can consistently and persistently be out of your mind. That tool is called forgiveness. Nothing to do with letting us off the hook, but properly used, it collapses the source of the problem. That is perception that is nothing but a reflection of mind energy. Remember, Yeshua said, listen to these two physicists, and then go back to the opening words in the book of John, where it doesn't say, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. It says, in the beginning was the mind energy, and the mind energy became flesh. So what Bohm is saying is, we're trying to solve a problem with the thought that created it, the mind that created it. So thought tells us, according to Bohm, that the problem is out there. Oh my God, projection. Thought is doing all the activities to create the problem. And you'll remember in the worksheet, we have a statement about this state of denial that was called sustained incoherence. Bohm was the one who originated that idea of sustained incoherence. So he says thought is doing all the activities to create the problem and then does another set of activities to try to overcome it. It doesn't stop doing the things that create the problem in the first place. When you bring Yeshua's forgiveness work in, your mind stops originating the mind energy that created the insanity in the first place. Now, again, he goes back to this world of matter. Matter, he says, is a small ripple on this ocean of energy. But since we, too, are constituted of this matter, we no more see the ocean than probably does a fish swimming in the ocean see the water. In considering the relationship between the finite and the infinite, we are led to observe that the whole field of the finite is inherently limited. So we have this finite world and the infinite. Why is this finite world limited? Well, David Bohm has an explanation. The finite world is limited and is, in the ancient teachings, they talked about Maya or illusion. Remember, Yeshua said, don't judge by appearances. This is all leading up to the tool with which to free yourself of this codependent dynamic that has been passed from generation to generation, from time immemorial in each of our bloodlines. So in considering the relationship between the finite and the infinite, we are led to observe that the whole field of the finite is inherently limited, that it has no independent existence. Oh. Everything that is transitory relies on what underlies it. What underlies it? But the creation and the creator. So it has the appearance of an independent existence, but that appearance is merely the result of an abstraction of our thought. We can see the dependent nature of the finite from the fact that every finite thing is transient. It comes and it goes. Bohm goes on to say, a great many people think they are thinking when they are merely rearranging their prejudices. And he says, when we're talking about energy, he says the universe consists of frozen light. There's Max Planck, an intelligent spirit holds a frequency that brings the atom together. Light. Now, what is the source of our trouble? Bohm goes on to say. He says the source is basically in thought. The thing we use to solve our problems is the source of our problems. This system, thought, has a fault in it, a systematic fault. It is not a fault here or a fault there, but is a fault that is all throughout the system. It is everywhere and nowhere. That system not only includes thoughts and feelings, but it includes the state of the body and the whole of society. You may say, I see a problem here, so I will bring my thoughts to bear on this problem. But my thought is a part of the system that created the problem. It has the same fault as the fault I'm trying to look at and repair. Thought is constantly creating problems that way, then trying to solve them. But as it tries to solve them, it makes it worse because it doesn't notice that it's creating them. And the more it thinks, the more problems it creates. Remember what we said early in the workshop? Way back in the Power Person section? Doing the Power Person worksheet? When we live in denial, we dissociate from the very cause of what needs to be healed. The more one thinks, so what's the number one pseudo solution? Everybody remember what that is? The number one pseudo solution is if I could just figure this out. If I could just use my mind to fix this. Remember this 9-bit evidential mind that we have. So here's what David Bohm says about the 9-bit evidential mind. Whatever you think, whether it's from, and I'm putting this sentence in, whether it's from carbon-based memory, that is the past stored in the mind of man in you, whether it comes from that or from the creator's mind, it appears in consciousness as a show. That's the way thought works to display its content, a show of imagination. So here's David Bohm acknowledging, and remember, this is a guy who sourced or helped to source the holonomic model of the mind that would create holograms. But any hologram that we create is out of an existent energy. If that system is not open to something new being originated, if one is stuck in that cycle, then one has fallen off of the wall and is trying to climb back up to the top of it by using the tools of the fallen state, the broken state. And that's where, as I was saying yesterday, you can't work backward from brokenness to wholeness. Remember, in physics, there's a term that says the sum of the parts is greater than the parts themselves. You can't take the parts and get back to the source of it. What you need to do is you need to bring the state of wholeness into the brokenness. And the state of wholeness, the state of being, the state of functioning as conscious, active, present love delivers that wholeness, that state of love to the brokenness, and that's when, bingo, the brokenness heals in an instant. So Bohm goes on to say, so whatever our BS is, whatever our belief system is, he says the way thought works is to display its content as a show of imagination. Therefore, if you think the observer is separate from the observed, it's going to appear in consciousness as two different entities. Remember early in the workshop, we talked about vignettes. The purpose of carbon-based memory is to play out these vignettes, these little movies. Bohm goes on to say the generally accepted assumption in thought is that it's just telling you the way things are and that it's not doing anything, that you are inside there deciding what to do with the information. That is, again, the number one pseudo solution. If I could just figure this out. But what he says is, you don't decide what to do with the information. In that state, thought runs you. And, when we look at information coming from carbon-based memory, again, it's the world's cheap copy of thought. It's just replicating. It's remnants of generations of thoughts. Yes, those who originated, but the information that was stored in carbon-based memory simply plays out over and over and over, replicates itself. It's like a virus. And once we're lost in the mind energy, the thinking of brokenness, i.e., somebody out there, number one, is separate from me. Remember Einstein says, if you think you're separate or separated from the rest of humanity, you're living in an optical delusion. Thought is creating images because that's what thought does, and the images aren't true. You can't figure out from that broken state what wholeness is. But you can collapse that broken state and through the breath bring wholeness in. Through an act of will, through the spiritual faculties, you can choose to bring forward conscious, active, present love into the space where, having applied forgiveness, you've collapsed the perceptual mind's fantasies. So the mind, when it's thinking from blame, when it's thinking from brokenness, and yes, I know every one of our minds has all the evidence the world could ever offer about how the problem's out there. But the belief that the problem's out there is the brokenness. And all those types of thoughts can do, and it's been going on for how many generations? How many of us had parents, had grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, brothers, sisters? How many of us had them that lived in true wholeness? And if we're not living in true wholeness, then we're being trained into images of brokenness in place of that wholeness. And that function is labeled in Aramaic as the Antichrist. Remember, there is the mind of Christ, and that's not a religious idea, nothing whatsoever to do with religion. That word Christ in Aramaic, its original root, is the name of an office. So it quite literally meant the buttered one. When one was awakened to truth, to wholeness, they were anointed with oils. They were called holy, Wholly, not Holy, not holier than thou, not the false pretending to have it, but truly living in wholeness. So one who was functioning from that mind in them were called the Christed ones. So Jesus Christ is not a proper name. It's a man, his name was actually Yeshua, and they acknowledged him as the awakened one. It was a title of an office that he held. Now, as long as we're stuck in these generational patterns and generational thoughts based in brokenness, how do you tell there is brokenness present? There is blame. And it may even just be self-blame. But as long as there's blame there, there's brokenness. You can't reason from that back to wholeness. Can't put Humpty Dumpty together again. The wholeness will not appear no matter how much effort you put there. However, if you displace the brokenness, if you forgive, if you remove the brokenness, you make room for wholeness to be breathed into your physiology. So Bohm is saying this replicant mind is what controls each of us. And that thought creates divisions out of itself. And then says that those divisions are there naturally. Of course, everybody's separate. Again, Einstein. That's an optical delusion. Bohm goes on to say this is another major feature of thought. Thought doesn't know it's doing something and then struggles against what it's doing. Why does thought not know? Thought has no knower. The self that is based in broken thoughts. Remember, Yeshua referred to the two selves. He said, in order for you, being true self, wholeness, to live, you, non-being, false self, brokenness, have to be removed, have to die. The picture that shows up in our carbon-based memory minds of self is nothing but a picture. If you think you're a body, it's nothing but a picture made up of thoughts. It doesn't exist as an entity, therefore it has no knower. It cannot know anything, cannot understand anything. So Bohm says this part of us is doing something and struggles against it. It doesn't want to know that it's doing it. Thought struggles against the results, trying to avoid those unpleasant results while keeping up with the same way of thinking. And Bohm says that's what I call sustained incoherence. That's what I call codependence. Whenever you think or speak as though something outside of you is the cause of what's moving inside of you, you're living and working from brokenness. That needs to be forgiven. Now, as Dragnet used to say, there are a million stories in the naked city. Oh, yes, there are lots of people to blame. So Bohm goes on to say, indeed, the attempt to live according to the notion that the fragments are really separate is, in essence, what has led to the growing series of extremely urgent crises that is confronting us, and he's talking about the whole of humanity today. So he's saying, by living from this fragmented mind, this separated mind, and again, he coined the term unbroken wholeness. Not the best regulatory speech, but he's trying to attempt, with the language he had, this goes back 75 years ago, he's trying to explain what wholeness is. Properly stated, rather than unbroken wholeness, it would be whole wholeness, connected wholeness. And only those who come back to that connected place of wholeness are going to be able to move through and get back up on top of the wall. So Bohm says, again, he's speaking as a physicist here, one thus sees that a new kind of theory is needed, which drops the basic commitments to brokenness, and I add to that, and the pain of separation, and recovers. You've got to drop all commitment to brokenness, and brokenness equals blame. Okay, they're one and the same word. You've got to drop that commitment. And the pain of the loss of awareness of connectedness. Now, the disconnect never happened. But most people don't know that because they live in this picture world where all kinds of thoughts of brokenness occur and thoughts of separation. Great line in the Course in Miracles. I may not be quoting exactly, but one of the greatest thoughts of all is knowing the world of separation. The healing of the world of separation is just one thought away. When one heals that separation, the brokenness in themselves, then there is recovery of the true self. And David Bohm describes that as a deeper reality. Now, I would use the word actuality there, in which that which prevails is unbroken wholeness or being. And then he says, then individuality is only possible if it unfolds from wholeness. You can never actualize yourself as a human being from the broken state. So Bohm here is talking about what the replicant mind, or what we refer to as the replicant mind, does. Einstein had a different term for it, but he addressed it as well. Einstein says this, the intuitive mind, that would be the mind of being, the mind of wholeness, is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. That would be carbon-based memory. We've created a society, said, that honors the servant and has forgotten the gift. Each individual that brings correctness to that in themselves becomes part of the field of wholeness that strengthens the presence, the expression of wholeness energetically, and the stronger the presence of wholeness becomes, the easier it is for people to hear it, the easier it is for people to connect to it. But most people are bound by Humpty Dumpty, bound by the broken mind. Remember, Yeshua said, the master is bound by the servants in his own household. The household is your own body-mind unit, your own karma-based memory. And you're designed to be on top of the wall. You're designed to be a creator. For those who joined us a little late, we started with a nursery rhyme. We're all taught about codependence early in our lives, about Humpty Dumpty who sat on a wall. had a great fall, and all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't bring wholeness together again. Why? Because once one falls into brokenness and believes this world of blame, somebody out there is the problem, then we've created this unconscious condition. And that which was designed to serve us, mind energy, in bringing about a conscious creative process, remember, we were put on top of the wall with the ability to originate. But when we fell and believed our own blame-based thinking, we entered into this codependent state. Now you listen to what that nursery rhyme says, you listen to Einstein, you listen to Bohm, and then you come back to Yeshua, and what does he say? What's said in the opening words of the book of John? In the beginning was the mind energy, and the mind energy became flesh. If you are living from replicate mind energy, you're living from brokenness. And it needs to be forgiven, that's all. Nothing to do with you're going to forgive somebody else for it. So Yeshua created the key to actually removing the problem. And I'd offer that key is forgiveness. And why and how does it work? It took me decades of working with forgiveness to understand this. Literally, if you listen to any of my recorded workshops up until about probably 17 or 18 years ago now, maybe it's not even that long, you won't hear me, when you watch the Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop today, you'll notice that at the top of the board, there are 3 words. It's always been that way since the first workshop. But the words used to be deny, people living in denial, and then suppress, and then project what's been suppressed. It was about 15 years ago when I was taught what that really meant, and that it wasn't denial. Pardon me, it wasn't suppression. It was that we dissociated from and created this unconscious mind. That was the fall that was being spoken of. It's the fall that's spoken of from the Garden of Eden. It's the fall from, Humpty Dumpty's wall. Replicate thinking by the replicate mind is the problem. So you've got to be out of your mind. And how do you change that if that's running you? Well, the number one skill is going to be the willingness and the ability to enter into process work. And in this work, our definition of processing is the ability to hold love, conscious, active, and present when something less than love comes up. So that's processing. So whenever the mind comes up with its blame, its trauma, its hurt, its sadness, its grief, and its constructs based in it's all somebody else's fault, you have to know how to collapse that. And that's what forgiveness does. The immature, broken Greek mind told us, oh yes, well, here you are, your thinking is true, it is all somebody else's fault, but you just let them off the hook and then everything will be okay. That's insane. Forgiveness has nothing. Never, ever forgive anybody for anything, including never forgive yourself. But at the same time, you've got to learn to forgive continuously. And most people say, well, but that doesn't make sense, Michael. Well, if you're listening to that from the broken mind, you're right, it doesn't make sense. If you're listening to it from the mind of wholeness, it makes perfect sense. There's nothing for me to let you off the hook for. But if a behavior that you did aroused in me the pain of my own blame and brokenness, and I know how to forgive that, that is not how to let it off the hook, but literally how to remove that block. then the fact that you've shown up and resonated that in me gives me the gift of being able to free myself from it. And that's the whole bottom line of this work. So a new set of skills is required if you're ever going to remove yourself from the replicate mind. And that the story of that happening was told thousands of years ago when we had this little skinny kid named David, and there was this giant, undefeatable monster named Goliath. David had 5 smooth stones. Now, remember, David was a shepherd boy. You'll remember that I've shared with you many times over the years that when you apply and engage in forgiveness, you'll go into states of spontaneous meditation. You'll notice there are paths that are based primarily on meditation. Meditate, 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 meditate. Now, David was a shepherd boy. He wasn't trained in the art of war. What's a shepherd boy got to do at 3 in the morning when the sheep are out there and they're sitting in the field under the stars? Going to be a whole lot of meditation, a whole lot of being out of your mind. And in that is the awakening of what were called the 5 smooth stones. These weren't rocks he was going to go beat some giant up with. That story of David and Goliath is a story of wholeness and brokenness. Wholeness was little, it was small, it was called the still small voice, but that's where the power was. Goliath comes up with a big loud voice and his muscle and his sword and his shield and his spear. But David has spent time in wholeness. And when Goliath, the ego mind, the non-being mind, the blame-based mind comes forward, David has the tools with which to process through the control that Goliath has over him. And so he puts an end. Remember again, Yeshua said, in order for you being to live, you non-being have to die. Goliath has to go. But Goliath seems to be the one with all the power. That's because we're stuck in that replicate thinking. That's because, as David Bohm said, our problems are created with our thoughts, and we pretend we have nothing to do with the thought, in fact, or the problem. And in fact, we pretend thought tells us it's got no power, it's not doing anything, it's just reporting, it's just telling us the way it is. See, the problem is them out there. And so having bought into that lie that comes from brokenness, that self that's based in so much rage, so much terror, so much trauma, so much abuse, so much pain, created by self, delivered in the creation, because that's what the creation is about. That's what living on the high wall is. It is your creative ability. That's what needs to be recaptured. Well, Michael, are you telling me that every assault, everything that's ever happening, all those terrible things, that I'm to blame for them? No, I'm not saying you're to blame at all. You'll notice the worksheet says no fault forgiveness process. This isn't about establishing fault, i.e., in the sense of who's to blame. But if I'm engaging in generational patterns of mind energy, of abuse and of trauma and of blame, then working from brokenness, I will bring about the same results as my ancestors have. And so until I wake up from that a different possibility occurs. So what are the 5 smooth stones? Well, first of all, there is will. Now, there's a cheap copy of everything true in the spiritual dimension that Goliath is God. And Goliath is always coming off as a tough guy. So what's Goliath's cheap copy of will? Willpower. I will force. I will make this happen. I can fix that person out there that I have so much terror and trauma about. Excuse me, if you have terror and trauma about somebody, you're supporting them in their terror and trauma. It's about mind energy. You've got to change that thinking. But thought has no power. It can't do anything. Thought is the only power. And you either think with the mind of Christ, that is, the mind of the active presence of responsible love in you, or you think with the mind of the Antichrist, the mind of blame, of guilt, of fault, of shame, and commitment to its one world universal religion. You got to give up that membership card. So will is a gentle, it's not the tough guy that's going to force everybody. The spiritual faculty of will is the ability to manage your own mind. That's all it is. Will is a faculty with which one manages one's own mind. And then there's a second one. The second of the smooth stones. And these are things you have to work with and practice with in order to make them the smooth stones, in order to make them skills that are easy for you to use. The second one is intuition. Think of that as your inner tutor. There is a teacher in you that will show you everything. There is a teacher in you that energetically has awareness that it is part of the whole, unbroken wholeness, as David Bohm called it, but wholeness or holiness. And if you make room for that still small voice and stop listening to Goliath's ragings of blame and shame and guilt and fight and destruction, then intuition, your inner tutor, delivered by, in Aramaic, Ruka Dekudsha, the words, if you looked on the worksheet and you see the words Ruka Dekudsha, what is that? It is a literal feminine elemental force in us that undoes the effects of our errors and teaches us the truth. It is your intuition. When you learn that that elemental force is there, then from being, you ask, you invite. Teach me, show me. So that's one aspect of Ruka Dekudsha. It is a feminine elemental force that teaches you the truth. But if you already know the blame's true and it's all about somebody else, there's no room for that still small voice to get in, and it's not going to seem like it even exists. It's not going to be available. So again, Ruka Dekudsha, a feminine element. Those words were translated by the Greeks as the Holy Spirit. There's nothing there about a disembodied spirit being. It is this feminine elemental force that when you invite her into activity, she will undo all of the energetic patterns of every error you've ever made. And that means every energetic pattern that exists anywhere in time or space that relates to this particular fault that needs correction. Then there's imagination. This is the third of the smooth stones. If you practice with being still, rather than sitting trying to figure it out, being still and letting the information come to you, then you will get images that come from the unbroken wholeness, as David Bohm called it. You will be instructed, gee, I'm not sure what to do about this problem with this person over here that I'm so concerned about. Then get still, get quiet, and we actually do a whole workshop based in this. We looked at trying to do it following up on the 9-day, why is this happening to me again? We're doing it at the end of the month, but there just wasn't space to do it. But intuitive development, learning to receive information without reference to the mind or the senses. That's the intuitive faculty. Then imagination allows the images to come, allows the directions to come directly from wholeness. that will break through to the non-being mind and make higher understanding available. Then there's true perception. So intuition, the non-being mind's got psychic. Imagination, the non-being mind's got fantasy. You know, I can't tell you over the years how many people I've heard from that. Oh, Michael, this work is so wonderful. I'm going to do it. I'm going to support it. I'm going to be part of it. Yeah, that's a great fantasy for most people. Can you put legs under it? That's the imaginative faculty. And then the non-being mind, out of thought, produces these pictures of blame or perception. Perception is nothing but a reflection of thoughts held in mind that are converted into pictures. Everything from the past, every bit of mind energy from the past that shows up as a picture in your mind is a fraud, because it's pretending to be here, now, present, when it's actually just a reflection of something from the past. And then the fifth of the smooth stones is that of choice. Now, choice does not mean decision. When most people make decisions, if I say, don't think about the color of your car, and then I say, what are you thinking about? And you go, well, I chose to think about the color. No, you didn't choose to think about the color of your car. It was just pure resonance. I set up a frequency with my voice. You have brain cells, those brain cells fire, and the mind shoots up decisions. That's the non-being mind, the broken mind's cheap copy. But then there's choice, the ability to originate a frequency that's never been seen on the planet before. Gather those 5 things together, free yourself of the hostility and fear-based mind, and you restore to the top of the wall, as you have been designed to be from the beginning. And we're here to support you. And we're delighted that you're participating in our conversation. You hold the space for you to have the best year yet of your eternal life.